All right, Parsha 1:1, Parshas Shelach. The name of this week's Torah portion comes from the second verse of the Torah portion. The first is Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Shlach lecha anashim, send for yourself men. This is now the setup, the story of the spies, which is going to be actually the bulk of this week's Parsha. Now, at this point, this day is now the 29th of Sivan in the year 2449, which means it's about a year and a few 2-3 months after the Exodus. They were on track right now to enter the land of Israel. If you look at a map, it doesn't take 40 years to get from Egypt to Israel, even walking, even with millions of people. It didn't have to take so long. Now, part of it was getting the Torah, and then they stayed around the mountain for about a year, and then they built the Mishkan. Part of it was last week's Torah portion, we learned about a 5-week delay that occurred, but they were still on track to go into the land of Israel. Now comes the big moment. People decide they want spies to go check out the land. God did not specifically command sending out the spies, but he gave Moshe an option. You could send out the spies. Now Moshe figured, we'll send out the spies because on the one hand, we know that God's going to perform miracles for us. We're going to conquer the land. But at the same time, usually there has to be some sort of natural vessel, or there's still a natural way to go about things, even praying for and expecting the miracles to come. There's as a general idea, there should be a natural channel for things. So you say, okay, we'll have the spies go, not to decide if we could conquer the land, but to decide how we could conquer the land, which is, of course, where the mistake came. Because the spies went, and it wasn't about how they could conquer the land, they focused rather on the if. Now, just to kind of bring out this point, there's a lot of commentary, and especially Chassidic commentary, that speaks about the spies were not particularly, they weren't specifically just going to just ruin everything. What they were actually arguing against and saying is that, while we're here in the desert, all of our needs are taken care of, we can lead spiritual lives. We mean encased within spirituality. Going into the land means that we're going to start entering into the physical world, and the physical world, the worries and concerns are going to overtake the spiritual life that we're leading here. So why would we do that if we could continue living this kind of life? Because of course where the mistake was made, because the point is not to live in a cocoon removed from the rest of the world, but to live within the real world and turn the world into a world of holiness, and a world in which all that we do is for God, even with the struggles and the physicality of it. So they figured they're going to send one man from each tribe. We got to elect one person from each tribe. So there's going to be 12 spies altogether. The tribe of Levi was not part of this, but the tribe of Joseph, is 2 tribes. Remember, because Manasseh and Ephraim both became their own kind of tribes. There are 2 men from all of them. The Torah portion actually lists the names of the spies, but there are 2 from all of them. One from the tribe of Yehuda. His name was Caleb ben Yefuneh, so Caleb, as they say. And from Ephraim, someone named Hoshea ben Nun, otherwise known as Joshua. These were the 2 from the 12, 2 out of 12, who had their head on straight the whole time and were determined to encourage and say, yes, we can, we're going to make this happen. Now, it actually says that before they left, Moshe davened for Hoshea, he prayed over him, and that's when he added the Yud to his name. Now you're going to be Yehoshua now, because that Yud stood for God, that you should withstand kind of the negative intentions that the spies might have. And they said about Caleb that when they actually went to the land of Israel, he went to Hebron, to the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, where the forefathers are buried, and he went to pray there, also to pray for strength, etc. So the difference is that Yehoshua kind of was gathering inspiration from Moshe, and Caleb went and kind of created his own inspiration. And that's why the 2 of them were able to withstand what occurred. Now, it's actually interesting. The Torah portion does not use the word. We call it the story of the Meraglim, the stories of the spies. But in the Hebrew text, it doesn't specifically use that word. It kind of just uses, the men went out and these people had gone out to inspect and explore and that sort of stuff. Because that's what they were supposed to have done. Anyways, Moshe told them, go and see if these people, do they live in regular cities? Do they live in fortresses? Right? Are they a strong people or weak people? Check out what's going on there, and also check out the land once you're out there. And they went, and they checked it out, and what they bring back with them, it said, now again, Yehoshua and Caleb were not part of this part of things. So it said they cut down a cluster of grapes, and it took 8 of them to carry it. And one person carried a pomegranate, not because it was tiny in his hand, but it was a massive pomegranate. One person carried a massive fig. They brought back these massive fruits. And they were in the land for 40 days. It was a miracle unto itself that took only 4 days to scat out the entire land of Israel. And they come back and they're like, listen up, peoples. This indeed is a land flowing with milk and honey, as has been promised. And also, check out, these are the fruits. They're massive. Look at what's going on there. By the way, these people are mighty and their cities are fortified. And they are we saw they're the descendants of giants. And immediately Challah cuts in and is like, don't listen to this. We can conquer the land. We don't have to worry about it. God's with us. And part of the question is, why did he cut in there? Is because he saw that they had switched the order of things. Moshe said, go check out the people, as in figure out how we could conquer the land. And also, by the way, I want to just check out the land while you're at it. As they came back, the spies came back, and they first started talking about the land, and then started talking about the people. As in, Moshe said, find out what kind of work we have to put in this thing, and then you'll tell us about the reward we'll get for it. They came back and they're like, look, we can get this really cool land, but here's what it's going to take to get it, so, the payoff's not worth it. That little switch already alerted Challah about this is not going to go well. Then the spies start countering, like, no, they're bigger than us. And this is a land that consumes its inhabitants, and we look like little tiny grasshoppers to them. And you know what else we saw there? We saw there the descendants of the Nephilim. Nephilim were, back in the day, when, back many moons ago, when, before the whole story of Egypt happened, before all this happened, when man had first turned to idolatry, there were angels who argued with God, like, look at these human beings and look at their behaviors and what they're doing. We could do better than them. Okay, well, let's see. So there were angels that came down to earth, and the second they got down, they became corrupted, because they thought, we could withstand the physical world, and they didn't appreciate the toil that man goes through and the struggle. And what the slides that they were trying to point out is like, see, look, you can't live a holy life in a physical world, which again, of course, is where they kind of went wrong. So all the people now, they start weeping. They hear all these reports and they start weeping, except for the tribe of Levi, and the women were not part of it, because the women have always been believers. Now, this particular day is the 9th of Av, which anybody knows from the Hebrew calendar, the 9th of Av is the day of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the temples in Jerusalem. There's commentary that say that they began weeping then, and God sort of said, like, you're crying now for nothing. Like, there's going to come a time you'll have something to cry over. Kind of. Unofficially. Now, then they started saying, we're going to appoint a new leader for ourselves. We're going to go back to Egypt. Blah, blah, blah. And Moshe and Aaron are praying with them. Like, don't rebel. Don't worry. Why are you guys doing this? We could totally, and Challah and Yeshua are cutting in and saying, no, God's with us. We could totally conquer the land. Why you don't have to be worried about this, etc. They basically got to the point where the people wanted to stone Yeshua and Challah, because they were just like, enough from these two. Let's get rid of them and their misleading messages here. Then all of a sudden, the glory of God, kind of like a cloud, appears before everybody, and that silences everybody. And then God says to Moshe, like, how long are these people going to doubt me for? That's it. I'm getting rid of all of them, and you're going to start a new nation. And Moshe's like, look, if you get rid of all of them, this message, what happened here is going to start leaking out, and people are going to find out about it. And back in Egypt, they're going to be like, oh, look, that God that took him out, he couldn't even bring them to the land that he promised them. There was a whole to-do about nothing. Forgive them. And God says, okay, salach li kedvarecha, I will forgive them according to the words that you said. Moshe made a very strong case for them. But, however, these people who saw my miracles, they saw what I did to Egypt, they saw my glory, and they've challenged me. Which you've actually had until this point, there were 10 times that they challenged God. With, what are we going to do? What are we going to drink? And where are we going to meet for all the kind of different things that have been happening until now? They are not going to enter the land. They're not going to be killed all at once. They're going to gradually die off. Any from the age that gets counted from the age of 20 and up, which means, again, the tribe of Levi, they get counted from the age of 1 month and up, right? We went through all the censuses that occurred. So the tribe of Levi, they were not part of this. They were not under this punishment that was going to occur. And also, again, the women were not counted from, when we talk about who's counted from 20 and up, those are the men specifically. So at that point, any man 20 and up, they were going to die off in the desert 40 days, 40 years, even though already one of the years had passed. So anybody who was already 20 or older at that point was not going to live past the age of 60, basically. And God said the children are going to be the ones who go in and they're going to inherit. Also, by the way, Challah is going to get the city of Hebron as a present because of what he did. And now we're going to turn everybody around. We're about to enter the land, but but now we're turning around now, and we're setting a new course. Time to wander a little bit until the new generation. One generation dies out, and the new generation takes over. And Hashem uses the words of Ad Masai Leidara Azos. He says, until how much longer this evil congregation. And the commentaries say, specifically Rashi commentaries say, but we say Leida Azos says this congregation. That's when we learned that a collection of 10 men is considered congregation. That's where we get the idea of minyan for, right? Because there were 10 spies who spoke against the land. The spies were punished immediately. They didn't get any gradual thing. God's like that. They get punished immediately. But that's part of the whole thing when people wonder about, like, why are men with the minyan, it goes all the way back to the spies. So it's not specifically a positive thing. I mean, it's great. It's a positive thing now for men getting together to pray, which is very good. But it's not specifically for women to be an obligation for them for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is because they did not participate in what happened here with the spies. Of course, Yeshua and Caleb were not either going to be punished. And so it's the Levi women, Yeshua, Caleb, the children, etc. Now, part of this is just a little thing that, if you remember, last week's Torah portion ended off with the story of Miriam. Now she got tzara, some sort of, unintentionally speaking, not good about Moshe. So we have the story of the spy starts off this week's Torah portion to say, hey, you didn't learn your lesson about how careful you're supposed to be with your words instead. So we have, after God decreed all this, the people mourned, and there was one group among them that were like, okay, that's it, we've repented, we've sincerely repented, and that's it, now we're ready to go conquer the land. And God's like, what are you doing? No, that's not the plan anymore. The plan is not to go forward anymore. And the people were kind of adamant they were going to go forward, and Moshe said, don't do this, you're not going to succeed. They still pressed forward anyways, and they were crushed, they were defeated, because there was a new plan now. Now the Torah portion switches over to speak about other things. And this is kind of what the Torah portion wraps up with, a few other points. We have one, it talks about the grain offerings and the libations, the wine and the grain that goes along with certain sacrifices. So when you're going to enter the land, which now is going to be in 39-ish years from this point, and you're going to offer the ascent offerings and the peace offerings, whether it's going to be for a pledge or a dedication or a festival, whatever it is, there's a grain and a libation offering that accompany it. And according to the animal, that's what it's got to be. So let's say if someone's bringing a lamb or a goat as an offering, as a sacrifice, then it comes with a tenth of an ephah of flour, which is about 2.5 liters. A quarter of a hin of oil, which is about 1 liter. And then a quarter of a hin of wine, which again is about 1 liter. And if they bring a ram, it's 2/10 ephah of flour, a third a hin of wine, and a third a hin of oil. And then if it's a bull, an ox, or cow, then it's got to be 3/10 ephah of flour, which is about 7.25 liters. Half a hin of oil, which is about 2 liters, and half a hin of wine. And it says there's going to be one rule for everybody, the native, the convert. This is the amounts that have to be brought with each. Then the Torah portion switches over to the Mitzvah of Challah. That's in this week's Torah portion. Reishis Sarisa Sechem, the first of your doughs, of your breads. And it's a very big theme that they say that what the whole thing of Challah were, according to, if you make at least an omer worth of dough, which we have the measurements for that, and then you have to give at least one loaf to the Kohen. Someone could give more if they wanted to, but it has to be at least one loaf and certain measurements, but it's got to be. It's going to be a raised offering for Hashem, so you give it to the Kohen, etc. This is going to be the law for all generations. And it's an interesting thing that it talks about why Challah, they make such a big deal about Challah, and it's because giving Challah proves and it solidifies like this absolute belief within God, because it takes so much to make bread, from the planting to the harvesting to the milling to the kneading and to everything like that. And it's giving this piece of challah, which is what the mitzvah is giving a piece to the Kohen, which is, giving it to God, and the Kohen is God's representative. It tests an absolute faith of God being there every step of the way. And so it's considered a very big deal. And then it's just juxtaposed with a warning against idolatry, because it says that giving challah, it wards off idolatry, and because it attests to this sort of faith of God being there every step of the way. Now, it says, if someone inadvertently commits idolatry, and why is this such a big deal? It's a denial, for a lot of reasons, but it denies God's authority. It's a betrayal of the historic covenant between God and the Jewish people, and it also just totally contradicts logic to be worshiping some piece of nothingness and saying like, oh, this has power. But if there's this inadvertent transgression, so whatever it is that, because certain idols were, let's say, worshipped in certain ways, so someone didn't know passing by that, oh, this was considered a form of worship for it, whatever it is, then the community was led to this sort of thing. They would offer a young bull as an olah sacrifice, as scent, and also a young male goat as a sin offering. The Kohen would atone for the community. If an individual, they brought a 1-year-old female goat as a sin offering, the Kohen atones, and this is the same law that applies for all. Basically, there has to be repentance. Right now, someone God forbid, intentionally commits idolatry, they're under the threat of kares, which is being excised, that their soul could be cut off. God forbid, unless there is full repentance that comes. Now we got a short little story gets plugged in here. This occurs on the 28th of Iyar of 2448. So this is actually about a year ago. About a year ago that this story occurs. And it's a story about keeping Shabbos. And it says that keeping Shabbos is like keeping the whole Torah because, again, it's the testimony of God as ruler of the world. And this story happened on the second Shabbos that the Jewish people kept in the desert following the Exodus. And it says that there was a man who was gathering wood on Shabbos. He was warned, he continued to gather wood. So the people brought him to Moshe and Aaron. They hadn't yet gotten the Torah, so this is how far back we're going. And they didn't know what to do with him. They stuck him in jail. They're like, we know you're not Jewish. We know there's a death penalty here, but we don't have the Torah yet, so what happens? So they were instructed, God instructs Moshe instructs the people, take him out of the camp, and you got to stone him. That's what it says. That's the story that it puts in here. Then the Torah portion ends off with the Mitzvah of Sitsis. And here also talks about how Tzitzis is like keeping the whole Torah. And it says that the Baal Shem Tov would say that the angel Michael, the Malach Michael would give everything. His awareness of God and divinity and all that sort of stuff just for even one tzitzis, one strand of the tzitzis. That's how great of a mitzvah it is. And the commandment is that any four-cornered garment that someone has, that a man wears, has to have tzitzis. So today they wear a separate tzitzis, but technically, if there is a four-cornered garment, it's supposed to have tzitzis on it. Which is why there's certain coats and stuff like that where they round out the bottom so it's not four corners. But it's four-cornered garment. Four-cornered garment that someone wears has to have tzitzis. And what it's supposed to be is that there's one strand that's supposed to be dyed sky blue. This color, it was from the blood of like a particular fish or something that they would dye it, which is why we don't necessarily see it so much today. We don't necessarily see it today because what fish is that or whatever it is. So there's one wool thread that was dyed the sky blue color, and then the other 3 were white. And they you got 4 strands, and you fold it in half, which kind of gives 8 strands, right? That's how you thread it. You thread it through the hole in the corner, and you get 8 strands. Then you do 5 knots. And there's a whole calculation about when you take the gematria of each letter is worth something. So you have a tzaddik is 90, and a yod is 10, a tzaddik is 90, yod is 10, taf is 400, that equals 600. And then because you took the 4 and you fold it in half, that's 8. And you have 5 knots, that's 13, so that represents the 613 mitzvahs. Very symbolic there. But as a general thing, God does say you're going to wear the tzitzis, you're going to see it, it's going to be a reminder to you, right? This now becomes part of the Shema prayer. It's going to be a reminder to you to keep the Torah and do what you're supposed to do, and it's a reminder that you're supposed to be holy, that I'm God who took you out of Egypt to be your God, etc. And that is this week's Torah portion.